You're listening to the Trade Show Insights Podcast, Season 20, Episode 9. I'm your host and exhibit marketing strategist, Marlis Arnold, bringing you tools to improve your exhibit results. On today's episode, brought to you by the Exhibit Marketers Cafe, we're talking about how to build smarter, more impactful sponsorships that create value for sponsors, organizers, and the attendees. So my guest today is returning to Trade Show Insights. She's been here before. She also is featured in my book, Build a Better Trade Show Image, in the updated edition. I included some of her stories and examples. But in case you don't know Wendy Porter, she is the founder and chief event strategist of Wendy Porter Events, a Minneapolis-based experiential event agency. She has over 23 years of experience and has done more than 1,300 events she's produced, and she's managed $200 million in budgets for Fortune-level brands and major global activations. So she really knows her stuff. Wendy's known for her strategic approach to event marketing, driving measurable ROI, and building trust through high-impact experiences. And she recently launched Sponsor Link, which is a service that helps turn sponsorships into powerful business drivers through custom strategy and white glove activation. And just as an aside, we'll talk about this more in a little bit, but Wendy and I have been in conversations for about the past year talking a lot about sponsorships. And we both are working on, she's launching Sponsor Link, I'm launching your sponsorship map, and we're going to be working together on a lot of sponsorship focused things over the coming months. So Wendy, welcome back to Trade Show Insights.
Thanks, Marlis. It's exciting to be here again.
Well, let's just jump right in here. Like I said, we've been talking a lot about sponsorships, and let's kind of start with why, and one of the things you and I have talked about a lot is that the current sponsorship model is broken. And let's talk a little bit about how is it broken and why is now the time to really rethink and just kind of reinvent the whole sponsorship model.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me give you a little bit of backstory on how I kind of dreamed up Sponsor Link. So this all really started for me a couple of years ago when I was working with a client, and we had some money that we wanted to put into sponsorships. We didn't like anything that they had on their typical prospectus, right? Which was your typical platinum, gold, silver, bronze, and then maybe some things that you could buy, ad hoc. So I went to the organizers and I said, hey, I've got some money. Can we work together on a custom experiential activation? And they said no. Oh. And I was shocked. And I thought, wow, I have money to give you and you're just going to pass that up. And it came down to the fact that they didn't have the bandwidth to execute on it. They didn't have the time to think about something new, to make it happen. And so my sponsor, or my client, didn't end up spending any money at that particular show, extra money, because there was nothing that really worked for them. And then the third party organizer left that money on the table. So that gave me an aha moment where I was like, wait a second, why can't I be that intermediary? Why couldn't my company step in and help, third party organizers that simply don't have the bandwidth to change what they're doing and they're just doing rinse and repeat, right? Mm-hmm. They don't have the bandwidth to do it. They certainly don't want to leave money on the table, but they simply don't have the time, right? And then on the flip side, helping exhibitors that want to do something custom and different that really,
but they don't have the time and the bandwidth.
And they don't have the time. So why not put my company in the middle? It's kind of that bridge between the third party organizer and the exhibitor. So that's where this all started for me a couple of years ago in the thinking. And then of course you and I have talked and we can get into that. But, really what I found as I was evaluating sponsorships for my clients is that they aren't working anymore. We're all doing the same thing we did pre-COVID and it's not working anymore.
And
And
way,
so
way, way pre-COVID.
way,
I
way,
mean,
way
I
pre-COVID.
mean,
Yeah. I mean,
that's
they
the thing.
really haven't fundamentally changed in the
Yeah,
23 years I've been doing this.
I'm constantly telling show organizers, it's like, stop with the heavy metals. It's like the gold, silver, bronze the packages, those are so last century. I mean, it's
Exactly.
time to rethink the whole thing about just bundling a bunch of random stuff up in and calling it a gold level package. That means nothing.
Right. Right. Exactly. Exactly. So you and I talk about, logos on lanyards and,
Hmm.
logos on a big screen. It's just wallpaper, right? It's
Yeah.
not, it doesn't move the needle in any way and nobody remembers it. If you walk away and do a survey and ask people what brand was on the lanyard, they really don't know. So what's the point? Why you're spending your money on that?
But yet I think it's really funny. I was looking at a show's website just this week, and they had all their list of all their sponsorships. The lanyards have already sold.
Oh yeah.
And it's like,
Because they
so
think it works,
yeah,
right?
they
They
think
don't think it
and
works.
it's like, hey, this is something visible that we can, something tangible, it's like, oh, let's sponsor the lanyards or let's sponsor the tote
Yeah.
bag. And it's like, okay, like you said, is this really moving the conversation forward with the attendees? I mean, yeah, maybe it makes you memorable on the show floor because everybody's seeing your logo everywhere, but is it really getting you new business and new leads? And
Right.
I just can't see that it is.
Right. And I think what matters is what do you remember 6 months down the road?
Hmm.
Right? Not what you remember 5 seconds standing on the show floor. We can look over there and see the logo on the lanyard and the bag. But what do you remember 6 months down the road?
Well, and I had somebody make the comment, it's like, I've never made a buying decision based on whose name was on the lanyard.
Exactly. 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 Yep. Yep. So that's why you and I are having this conversation.
Yeah.
We need to start thinking differently about this.
Yeah. Well, and another thing I always talk to exhibitors about is what are their goals, and they need to choose the sponsorship that aligns with their goals.
Mm-hmm.
If they are looking for visibility, then do something like that. But if they're wanting to position themselves as a thought leader, you know, buying a banner ad in the lobby of the convention center is not positioning them as a thought leader.
Right. Agreed. Agreed.
So how can sponsors align and find opportunities that align with what they're trying to do? Like you said,
Mm-hmm.
you tried to reach out to the organizer and they just completely shut you down. But how do they go about figuring out how to make those sponsorships align?
Right. Yeah, I think it goes back to what you just said which is looking at your goals and objectives, right? So that's a number one thing you have to do when you're an exhibitor. Regardless if you're actually picking up a sponsorship or not, you need to know why are you
Exactly.
there? What are you doing? What are you trying to accomplish with your booth and with your sponsorships, right? So it starts with sort of that pipeline review. Like, what are we trying to do here? Is this an awareness thing? Is this a lead gen thing? Is this a deal acceleration? What is our goal and objective? And then you need to think about the attendee journey. When
Mm-hmm.
and where in the attendee journey would something feel natural, right? So it doesn't feel forced. And I also like to have people sort of look at a Venn diagram approach, do a test around that. Like if it only serves the sponsor to get them money, skip it, right? If that's
Mm-hmm.
not a good use of your funds. If it only serves the attendee, maybe you don't need to sponsor that either. You need something that serves both communities, right? And when
Mm-hmm.
you find that intersection, that's what makes a good sponsorship. So I think they need to be bespoke. I really do. I don't think you're ever going to really find a sponsorship that's really going to serve your needs perfectly. And so that's why I'm really, really advocating for third-party organizers to make sure they have the strategies and the teams in place to create those custom sponsorships, because I think that's what really is going to move the needle. That's my
Yeah.
take.
Yeah, and like you said, it's something that it needs to be a win-win for everybody.
Right.
Because if the sponsor's just doing it just because, well, for one, just because they've always sponsored, the opening reception or whatever, and they don't really know what they're getting out of it, that's not really producing anything. If they're sponsoring it just because they think it's something that the attendees want, like the, you know, closing night concert with some big, huge, big name rock star,
Mhm.
How is that really getting them any benefit?
Right.
Um, and I like to talk to exhibit or to organizers about what are the attendee complaints and what are the problems, and
Mhm.
having sponsorships that fix those things. If transportation from hotels to the convention center is a problem, then come up with some kind of a creative transportation sponsorship. And I know you've done some creative transportation
Mhm.
activations in the past,
Yep.
but finding creative different ways to solve a problem. So
So
what are your thoughts?
I recently heard a really great one around that. So, um, this company, they decided they wanted to sponsor transportation, but it was white glove transportation. So they had certain key
Mm,
people that they really wanted to get in a room with. And so they sponsored a pickup service, a black car that went and picked that person up at the airport that they were really trying to get in a room with. And
yep.
then the sponsor was in the car
Exactly.
with the person they picked up. So they had this
Yeah.
lovely 20-30 minute conversation from the airport to the hotel.
Yeah. And
And they paid for the ride.
it solved the attendees problem. They didn't have to, wait in line for a Uber or whatever. It gave the sponsor the opportunity, like you said, to get one-on-one. And it was just something that's going to provide a memorable experience
Right.
overall.
Right. And
So
what did
yeah,
that cost them? A
yeah,
couple $100 for
yeah,
a maybe, depending on how
yeah,
long the ride was.
yeah, yeah.
Right. So,
Exactly, exactly. And they could hand pick and only offer that to the people that they
right.
were wanting
Right.
to.
Right. These key
Now
people
it
in the
may
car.
or may not actually have gone through the official organizer.
This is true. This is true.
So
I don't know on that in that particular example if they did that on their own or if that was through the third party organizer. But but again, it could have been through the third party organizer. Why
yeah.
why couldn't you offer that service?
Well, and exactly. I mean, for the third party organizer, they could actually have, pay for the service, and it wouldn't necessarily be as VIP as the town car or whatever, but they could have some kind of a fun transportation
Hmm.
shuttle
Hmm.
event or vendor that they
Yep.
could work with, and then the show is paying for this shuttle, but the sponsor, like you said, has an ambassador on board welcoming
Right.
people as they come on board, maybe handing out some kind of goodies, welcome bag as they arrive in the host city, and
Right.
all of these. There's just so much potential, and that's what just drives me bananas about so many shows when I, because I have been on more trade show websites than I can count. And I go and I look at all these sponsorship opportunities and I'm like, oh, they're just like, I'm like, okay, these are so boring and so dry and so been there, done that.
Yep.
It's like, can't we, why do you think it is that organizers are so resistant? Especially in that one case you were talking about, why would they not be willing to do something new if it brings in new income?
Exactly. It's bandwidth. I really think that's the reason. They don't have time to add one more thing to the plate.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what it gets
Well,
down to.
what about, and we've talked about some of these things of like, the lanyards and the tote bags and stuff, but what are some other sponsorships that you think are so, just forget about it? They're so old school, they should be avoided, or just
Mm.
they're ineffective. What are some other
Yeah, well,
things?
I think it's the things we talked about at the beginning, the logos on the lanyards, the logo on the big screen right before a, general session or something, the person standing up for 2 minutes before a general session and saying something,
Yeah.
my
Not
leadership
exactly
when I was in
memorable.
corporate, we're always like, does anybody even listen to that? I mean, you look around the room and they're all talking to each other. Nobody's listening to the 2 minute spiel, right? Even sponsoring a network session, I'm not sure, just having your name on the napkin or your name on the signage that you're sponsoring the breakfast or the lunch or the reception is really getting what you want. You want conversations with people. You want a
Right.
more curated experience where you're getting in a room with key decision makers and having a conversation. So turn that into a dinner with a small group of very selected people that you want to have a conversation with. That's a whole different thing.
Right.
But sponsoring a 2,000 person reception with your brand on the napkin, I don't think you're really going to get much out of that.
Yeah.
So,
Or even sponsoring like a some kind of a high-end lounge that,
yes,
that
places
only
where
certain.
people can, it's about relationships. I think that's
Mhm.
the key, right? Is thinking about where can I have a um a real conversation with somebody. So whether
Mhm.
it's in a, a car where you're picking somebody up at the airport and you have this, time together, or in a lounge where they're taking a break and charging their phone and grabbing a coffee and taking a break, that's a great place to have a conversation with somebody, or in a, a very curated dinner setting. There's lots of ways to help create those kind of conversations. And I think that's the key. The whole thing boils down to relationships.
Mhm.
So what can you create that people can sponsor that help create those, serendipitous moments, if you will, where people can have conversations?
Yeah. It's like engineered serendipity
It
basically.
is. And here's another one that I thought was interesting. Like, you take a break, you do your breaks between general sessions, let's say, and you've got the puppies that everyone's all around. I mean, all about the puppies. Well,
Yeah.
why don't you do walk the puppy? Go on a walk
Oh.
with the puppy. You get to take a dog for a walk down the convention center hallway with somebody you want to talk to,
Oh, no, that's
right?
clever. I haven't seen that one before.
Yeah, I mean, things like that, where you just have to start to turn something on its head, turn something that's already happening. You're having a coffee break, but turn it on its head. Instead of just sponsoring the coffee and maybe you have, your logo on the coffee cup. What
Mhm.
else can you do to create conversations during that time?
Yeah,
That's key.
exactly. Exactly. Well, what about another thing that I've been trying to push organizers towards is more year-round sponsorship opportunities. What
Yep.
are some of the things that you've seen around that, or what are some of your tips for how do you keep the sponsors engaged and build these year-round opportunities again without it becoming overly complicated, I guess you would
Yeah.
say.
Yeah, so there's a scale, right, and complexity, So if we're thinking more along that relationship building side of this conversation, it's, maybe you're sponsoring a series of dinners throughout the year. Once a month, you're hosting something in a different city, right, to get key people in a room. Those have been super effective, doing these small group dinners. But on the other end of the scale, there is it maybe it's sponsoring white papers that are getting delivered out in the newsletters,
Mhm.
or some sort of educational webinar series that you put together to keep the conversations going. And within that, maybe you try to do breakout rooms where people are getting some time together to have conversations virtually from a distance.
Mhm.
I think there's lots of ways we can think about that to try to keep the momentum going throughout the year. But again, it gets back to relationships. What can you
Yeah.
do and what can you build throughout the year to keep relationships building and moving forward?
Well, and that also feeds into the whole idea if you're wanting to be perceived as a thought leader in the industry, what a great way to do that. You're not only being a thought leader at the event, but you're also leading the conversation throughout the year with, like you
Right,
said, with webinars or with dinners or
right,
what other kinds of things that you could be doing throughout the year that keeps your name in front of those attendees all year long.
right.
And it's a value add for the organizer that they can, upcharge for these year-round partnership levels, that it takes you way beyond what you're just doing at the 3 or 4 day event.
Correct. Yep. That's exactly right.
So how does an organizer decide, or how can they even tell when, because some shows, I mean, it's like, oh my word, it's like you scroll and scroll and scroll, and it's this
Mhm,
page a mile long of all these sponsorship opportunities, and it's just like absolutely overwhelming for the
mhm.
exhibitor who's wanting to actually do something. They're like, oh my goodness, I don't even know where to begin. How does an organizer figure out what's like how much they should offer, or how much is too much, or where do you go from there?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I mean, I think the mantra is that if you have too many, they become too diluted, right? Your
Mhm.
impact becomes diluted. So I think there's sort of some rules of thumbs there that if you have, say, 5,000 attendees, you probably want between 15 to 20 strong activations, right? But if you have 500 attendees, if it's a much smaller conference, you would probably want to keep it under five, right? To make
Mhm.
an impact. So it's better to sell fewer high value activations than flood the floor with a bunch of gimmicks that really nobody can really notice, right?
Right. Yeah, I think that's true because, like you said, the more things that you offer, it just creates overwhelm for everybody.
Right.
And it's not really achieving the objectives for either the organizer or the sponsor if there's so many sponsorships that they're not selling, and the
Yeah, it just
exhibitors.
becomes noise. It's kind of
Yeah.
like, think about when you're looking at your email and you're getting bombarded with banner ads. It's
Hmm.
kind of that same idea, and you're not seeing any of it because it's too much, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
exactly. So, what is one thing that the sponsors should stop doing? I mean, what is it that you see sponsors doing wrong all the time that they really need to just totally, because we've talked a lot about how the organizer needs to change and, you know,
yeah.
revamp their offers, but what do you see that sponsors are doing wrong that they need to change?
Yeah, I think my biggest thing would be probably just trying to measure your success against, badge scans alone or attendance numbers. That's not really meaningful, right? It's
Hmm.
about qualified conversations, qualified leads. That's what you care about. How many people walk past your booth? That's an interesting stat to know, but it's not really going to change your ROI per se. Um, so that's what I would say, is really making sure you're clear on your goals and objectives and how you're measuring and what you're measuring, and making sure you're measuring things beyond those
Hmm.
high level metrics that don't really mean much.
Although, kind of backing up a little bit, I think even the fact of sponsors measuring how much traffic came to their booth as a result of their sponsorship is something that most of them don't do even in the first place.
That's
You know,
true.
they're not even necessarily, especially if they're just like, well, some things it's like you can't very well track how many of you came to our booth based on the lanyards. I mean,
Exactly.
things like that. But I think even like, if you're hosting the opening night reception, are you tracking how many people came because, of whatever activation you did during that event, that
Mhm.
official event or whatever. One of the things that I've found for some of my exhibitor clients, I always recommend, if you've got something new, pay to get in that new product showcase. It's usually not all that expensive to do that. That's like a great entry level sponsorship, but that's a high value sponsorship. I've
Mhm.
had exhibitors that have told me, we had a tiny little 10 by 10 in the back of the hall, but because we had something in the new product showcase, we had tons of people coming to our booth who said, we saw your product in the new product showcase and we
Right.
came because we want to check it out. That
Right. And
is a high value sponsorship.
agreed. And I think the key there is that a lot of people look at that and they think it has to be a new product, as in the whole company needs to be new to the market. And that's not necessarily the case. It could be a new product in a company that's 50 years old, right? But they're introducing a
Exactly.
new product. So,
Exactly. And
yeah.
you got to check with the show. Every show has kind of their own regulations. I think a standard is, a lot of times it's like it has to be something that's new since last year's show.
Yep.
And that gives you some pretty broad leeway. Even if it debuted 3 weeks after the show closed last year, it's new according to their rules. So I
Right.
think that's something exhibitors need to check and see, what are the rules for this? What do we have that might qualify? How, if we're looking to start to introduce something, maybe we can speed it up a little bit and debut it at the show,
Hmm.
and
Yep.
and have that. But if you that gives you a way that you can stand out from everybody else on the show floor. And it's not like you have to pay $25,000 to sponsor some big thing to do it.
Right. Yep. Yep. The other thing that I've seen really good success with is speaking slots.
Mm-hmm.
And again, the key there is to make sure it doesn't become an infomercial, right?
Yeah.
It's an educational opportunity to be seen as a thought leader, which then is going to lead people to go, oh, that person knows what they're talking about and what they're doing. I want to learn more about what they do at their company. It shouldn't be
Yeah.
an infomercial about your product, right? So,
Well, and one of the best ways to do that is do it more as a case study. Like, you
yes,
sponsor the session, but have one of your own clients be the presenter instead of your CEO, who, by the way, may not be the best presenter in the world anyway.
correct. That's exactly what
So
I've
if you're
done with
going to
some of my clients.
sponsor a
Yep.
session, make sure you've got this really wow session that you're going to be providing.
Correct.
And, and then again, driving that traffic, and tracking when the people come to your booth, how many people, and I've had exhibitor clients that have done that too. And they've told me, wow, we were blown away by how many people came and said, hey, we sat in your session yesterday morning and we just had to come to your booth and
Right.
learn more about this.
Right. Exactly. Yep.
So, Wendy, let's talk a little bit about, we kind of teased at the beginning about how we've been working behind the scenes to develop some new things. So, I know for me, one of the reasons that we decided to partner up is because we kind of come at this from a little bit different approach. For me, I really focus on the strategy and the evaluation and the initial audit on what's working, what's not. And organizers, sometimes they love that, but then like you said, then they have this gap of, okay, we've got all these ideas, but now how do we implement them? So that's where you come in.
Exactly. Yep. So yeah, that's why you and I think are going to be a really good partnership for this, because you've got the experience in doing that evaluation and that audit, right? And helping companies uncover opportunities and figure out what the right match is. And then coming up with some creative new solutions too, in partnership with our team. And then we would sort of pick up the baton from there, right? And help people with the activation side. So if they don't have the bandwidth on their internal team to actually make it happen in the booth with the activation, or the third party organizer doesn't have the bandwidth, my team can step in and help make sure that it comes together.
So you can be the boots on the ground.
Yes. Yes.
So for those of you who are listening and you're thinking, hey, we really need to rethink and revamp our sponsorships. So, reach out to Wendy and I, because from audit to activation, we've got you covered. If you want brainstorming and evaluation and consulting, start with your sponsorship map. That's my new program. So you can reach out to me about that, or go to exhibitmarketerscafe.com/your sponsorship map. And if you need somebody to help you activate, Wendy?
Yes, you can find us at wendyporterevents.com. Go underneath the services tab there and you'll find more information about Sponsor Link at that place.
Wendy, I think this is so exciting. I mean, I have so much fun working on sponsorships, and I'm really looking forward to teaming up with some clients and really walking them all the way through the brainstorming and the reevaluating all the way through to see what you and your team come up with through Sponsor Link.
Same here. I think it's super exciting.
All right. Thanks for being here, and thanks for everybody for listening. And if you want to make over your sponsorships, reach out to either Wendy or me, and we can't wait to see where you go from here. If you enjoyed today's episode and would like more, you can subscribe to the Trade Show Insights podcast and automatically receive future episodes on your chosen device. Simply search for Trade Show Insights in Apple, Spotify, or virtually anywhere else that podcasts are found, then click the subscribe button. Trade Show Insights is protected by the Creative Commons copyright license. You may feel free to share this recording with colleagues or embed it on your own blog, as long as it's shared in its entirety and is not used for commercial purposes. To learn more, please see the link in the sidebar of the show notes at tradeshowinsights.com. Well, that's it for this episode of Trade Show Insights. Be sure to check out our show notes and archives at tradeshowinsights.com. You can also connect with me using the social media links or the contact page on the site. I'm Marlis Arnold. Thanks for listening, and be sure to join us next time for more tools to improve your exhibit results.